The night she tried to shut down our Christmas party was the same night she realized she had picked the worst possible house to mess with, because what she thought was just another neighbor gathering was actually something much bigger, and by the time she understood who she was dealing with, it was already too late, and everything had flipped on her in a way she never expected. So if you have ever seen someone abuse a little bit of power and push too far, then you are going to enjoy this one. And before I get into it, make sure you like this video and subscribe to HOA Revenge Files, because these stories only get crazier, and this one builds up in a way that you will not see coming. It was a cold December evening, and the entire neighborhood had that calm, festive feeling. Lights were up on almost every house, soft music in the background, and families spending time together. And for the first time in a while, we decided to host a proper Christmas gathering, not something loud or wild, just a warm, open house where friends, neighbors, and a few people from the community could stop by, enjoy food, and relax, and everything was planned carefully. Parking was arranged, noise was kept reasonable, and the whole idea was to bring people together, not cause problems. By early evening, people had started arriving. The house felt alive, conversations, laughter, kids running around with hot chocolate in their hands and tea. He kind of energy that makes you feel like you did something right, and I remember standing near the entrance, just taking it all in, thinking, this is exactly how it should be: simple, respectful, and enjoyable. About an hour into the evening, things were going smoothly until there was a sharp knock at the door. Not the kind you expect from a guest, it was loud, controlled, and intentional. And when I opened, I drew a DMT there. She was standing straight with a serious expression, holding a folder like she had been waiting for this moment, and right away, I knew this was not going to be a normal conversation. Introduced herself in a firm tone as part of the HOA, and without even stepping inside, she began listing concerns about the gathering. She talked about noise, parking rules, and unauthorized events, and the way she said it made it sound like we were doing something completely out of line, even though everything was within reason and respectful. I stayed calm and explained that this was a small private gathering, not a public event, and that we had made sure to follow basic guidelines, but she did not seem interested in listening. She kept repeating that complaints had been made and that the event needed to be shut down immediately, and the confidence in her voice suggested she believed she had full authority to make that decision right there. At that moment, I could feel the shift in the atmosphere. Me, the music was still playing, but people had started noticing the conversation at the door, and the last thing I wanted was for the night to turn into tension. So I stepped outside and closed the door behind me to keep things contained, and asked her again to explain exactly what rule we were breaking. Instead of giving a clear answer, she flipped through her folder and pointed to general guidelines about disturbances and community standards, but nothing specific that applied directly to what we were doing. And when I pointed that out, she became more direct and said that regardless of interpretation, she was instructing us to end the gathering and disperse the guests. Now, I have dealt with situations like this before, and I know the difference between someone trying to solve a problem and someone trying to control a situation, and this felt like control, not resolution. And I told her respectfully that we were not violating any enforceable rule, and that the gathering would continue, that is, wedge. In her tone changed, she stepped a little closer and said if we did not comply, she would escalate the situation and involve higher authorities. And at that point, I had to make a decision: either give in and let the night fall apart, or stand firm and handle it the right way. I chose to stay calm and firm and told her she was free to escalate if she believed it was necessary, but that we were not shutting anything down without a valid reason. And for a second there was silence, like she did not expect that response, and then she turned and walked away, saying this was not over. I went back inside and kept things moving as normal, because the goal was to protect the atmosphere, not let one person change everything. And for a while it worked. People relaxed again, conversations picked back up, and the night started to feel normal once more. But in the back of my mind, I knew she was not done. About 30 minutes later, there was movement outside again, and this time it was more noticeable. Headlights pulling, you notice. Doors closing, voices outside, and when I looked through the window, I saw exactly what I expected. She had returned, and she was not alone. And that is where things started to shift in a direction she clearly thought would go in her favor, but it was about to turn in a way she did not see coming. When I stepped outside again, the scene looked more serious than before. There were 2 vehicles parked along the curb and a small group standing near the driveway, including the same HOA woman, now speaking with a couple of uniformed officers, and from her body language, it was clear she believed she had just strengthened her position. And for a brief moment everything paused, because this was the point where situations like this either calm down or escalate. I walked over calmly and greeted the officers. First, because respect goes a long way in moments like this, and before she could take over the conversation, I explained that we were hosting a small private Christmas gathering with neighbors and friends, that we had been mindful of parking and noise, and that there had been no direct issues brought to us by anyone living nearby, and both officers listened carefully, without interrupting, which already told me they were approaching this properly. She quickly stepped in and began repeating her earlier claims about violations and disturbances, saying that she had instructed us to shut everything down and that we refused, and the way she said it made it sound like we were ignoring rules on purpose. But when the officers asked for specific details about the violation, she hesitated for a second, and then referred again to general guidelines instead of anything clear and enforceable. One of the officers asked if there had been any official complaints filed that required immediate action, and she could not provide a direct answer, and that moment changed the tone completely, because now the focus shifted from authority to facts, and without solid grounds, there was very little that could justify shutting down a private gathering that was not causing a real disturbance. I kept my voice steady and added that we were fully willing to cooperate if there was a genuine concern, but that we needed clarity on what exactly we were being asked to fix, and that was when the officers took a step back and quietly spoke to each other for a few seconds before turning back toward us with a more relaxed posture. They explained that based on what they were seeing and hearing, there was no immediate reason to end the gathering, and that as long as we kept things respectful and within normal limits, there would be no I. Sue continuing the evening, and that was the point where her confidence started to fade because the situation was no longer under her control. She tried once more to push the idea that HOA authority should be enough to enforce her decision. But one of the officers calmly clarified that HOA guidelines are not the same as enforceable laws in that moment, and that they were there to address actual violas. In hoendi work, suitin. Sounds, not assumptions, and that statement settled it right there. There was a brief silence, and you could feel the shift in energy because the pressure she had tried to create was no longer working. And instead of backing down quietly, she made one last attempt by saying that this would be taken further and formally reviewed, and I simply nodded and said that was completely fine, because everything we had done was within reason and documented. As the officers prepared to leave, they gave a simple reminder to keep noise at a respectful level, which we were already doing, and then they walked back to Thea, our vehicles, and drove off, and just like that, the situation she tried to escalate had been resolved without disruption, and without giving her the result she wanted. She stood there for a moment, clearly frustrated, because things had not gone the way she expected, and without saying much more, she turned and walked back toward her car and left. And that was the end of her attempt to shut down the night. Weft. And I went back inside. The atmosphere was different, but not in a negative way. People had seen what happened, and instead of tension there was a sense of relief and even a bit of quiet confidence. Because the situation had been handled calmly and fairly, and the night continued exactly as it was meant to, with conversations, laughter, and that warm feeling you want from a gathering like this later on as things settled down. A few neighbors came up and thanked me for staying calm and not letting things spiral, because it could have easily turned into something uncomfortable for everyone. And that was the RB1. You'll take away from the whole situation, not every challenge needs to become a conflict. Sometimes staying steady and letting things play out the right way is enough. Looking back, what stood out the most was how quickly assumptions can lead someone to push beyond their limits, and how important it is to respond with clarity instead of emotion. Because when you stay grounded and focus on facts, situations tend to resolve themselves in a much cleaner way. If you made it this far, I want to hear your take. Would you have handled it the same way or done something different? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you know someone who has dealt with something like this, send them this story, and do not forget to subscribe to HOA Revenge Files for more real stories like this. Because there are plenty more situations where things did not go the way people expected, and you will not want to miss them.